So in the past, we've covered cancelled Pixar movies, DreamWorks movies, video game movies, but we haven't actually touched too much of Disney directly. Until today. Thank you to a bunch of people on our Discord for bringing up this prompt, as today we're talking about a unique looking unfinalized film by the name of My Peoples by Walt Disney Feature Animations. And it's certainly going to put us in a different space to all of our previous entries, as we're turning the clocks back now to 1998 for this. The whole context of who's in charge and involved is drastically different, so let's get into it. So My Peoples was a film and passion project developed in the late 1990s by a guy called Barry Cook. Here's his picture. And he was a pretty prominent Disney man back then. The 90s were a harsh time for the animation department, as many rival companies were putting their foot in the ring for the first time, and Disney themselves were struggling to keep up with their own successes of The Lion King for a while. That is until Mulan came out with just the kind of boost they needed at the time. And Barry Cook becomes involved there, as he was the co-director of Mulan, so not exactly a nobody. Similarly, in the past, he was also the visual effects supervisor for Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast, as well as effects animator for The Little Mermaid. So he's involved in all the major projects essentially. Now this new project began 5 months after Mulan was finished, or at least in pitch form it was, in which it was to be an animated short story Cook had previously written called The Ghost and the Gift, which had 3 children and a ghost helping an Appalachian couple get together. But it was rejected by the 2 head honchos of Disney in the late 90s, Michael Eisner, the Disney CEO, and Thomas Schumacher, the head of Walt Disney Feature Animation. It's a slightly different company name too. Anyway, Eisner thought the story needed more conflict, while Schumacher thought that the cast was too human, and the film was essentially a live-action story instead. So it was rewritten, and very much taken to an extreme countermeasure, as soon enough the characters became far from human, becoming a collection of junk parts as fits the culture of Appalachian residents who create household item dolls. So he created a maquette of a character, delivered it to LA, and had it placed on a conference room table for the next story meeting. Barry then gave his pitch over the phone, intrigued Schumacher with its nice reveal, and had My Peoples greenlighted with a budget of $45 million. So okay, that's a nice IRL tale of how it started. What was the actual story? Well, it went something like this. Set in Appalachia, Texas in the 1940s, My People was to have told the classic tale of 2 feuding families, not Montagues and Capulets, but the Harpers and the McGees, whose 2 children, Elgin and Rose, fall in love. Elgin as well dabbled in folk art, creating the doll characters we know as Angel, a heaven-themed doll made from a flower scoop created as a proposal gift, Abe, an Abraham Lincoln doll made from a scrub brush who has spoons for ears, Cherokee, a Native American boy doll fashioned out of an old garden glove, Miss Spinster, an old lady doll made from the wooden leg of Elgin's dead aunt. Oh. Good-O Boy, a hillbilly type doll made from car parts. Blues Man, a doll with the mannerisms of a blue musician constructed from the handle of a broken mandolin. Crazy Ray, a convict-themed doll made from a tree stump that apparently lived under Elgin's porch. And Angel's Dog, the canine companion made from a spool and clothespin. That's certainly a unique collection of characters, and considering it's the 90s, I'm cautious on whether this would have been done tastefully or not. There's certainly room for error. In fact, Cook also considered the possibility of an over-the-top southern preacher named Preacher Man. However, the execs at Disney worried that they could be considered offensive and cut him out. Maybe for the best. So with all that cast, how does it come together? Well, we actually have the opening pretty clearly laid out for us in a prologue opening number animatic. In it, it explains that the 2 families lived next door until one day some sort of misunderstanding with a pig causes the 2 old men of their respective families to fight. The 2 lovers meet up together and exchange gifts, and the next day the McGee's new chicken lays a blue egg that the family immediately assumes is a curse put on the family by the Harpers. And it turns out to be true in other descriptions, being a curse to make Rose forget about Elgin, but it backfires, swallowing the 2 of them away in a storm after their attempted proposal with the Angel doll, and later on animating all of Elgin's dolls. All the while, old man McGee is left looking sadly out of his window where his kids were last seen, or something to that effect is to be this first draft of the events. What we then hear going forward is that Angel, now animated, is unimpressed with being a proposal gift and has no intentions to help Rose and Elgin get together, instead leaving town. Some of the other dolls would go after her, whilst others did what they could to help the couple, including the act of keeping away Rose's arranged suitor Herbert Hollingshead. The details of how these adventures play out is where details become more muddled, especially with the fact that rewrites were aplenty. After all, while Eisner was on board, he described the project as cute but feeling small. But Barry Cook had counters for this in the production department, signing the actual voice cast to be massive, whilst keeping down costs by dipping into the CG transition going on at the time, pitching the production as being 70% CG and 30% hand-drawn. Wow, that's certainly ahead of its time, actually. And apparently CG was cheaper. How would that fit in? Well, the idea was going to be that the dolls would be CG, whilst the humans and backgrounds were traditionally animated, given the effect that they pop out on the screen once they become animated. An interesting idea, and we can see some of that in effect, though this is early 2000 tech, so it's a little rough around the edges. Still cool though. And hey, since you're halfway through, come subscribe for more cancelled content. Or better yet, check our streams. We're likely streaming right now to discuss movies if that's your thing. And there's some other stuff throughout the week, including a dedicated slot to do 12-hour streams every fortnight. So, look forward to that. So let's have a look at the actual visuals we have of the film. We've got a size comparison that confuses me because Abe is gigantic. What a doll. There's a test animation for Bluesman singing on a blues stage, an attempt at the 2D and 3D integration, which is a good go, though less succinct as what can be done in later years. There's an Edna Lee test, as it's called, looking like a 2D animated version of Miss Spinster, a new name and animation style? Okay. A good look at Old Man McGee, a whole storyboard of Old Man McGee's story, apparently, though it looks like the guy making some sort of poisonous substance. Is this meant to be a version of the curse, which means it's Old Man Harper? There's also pieces of a music number with the dolls, really highlighting the strange size differences in places. And then all sorts of locations for the adventure. A rail crossing with a steam train at night, out in nature with a few characters, a few glimpses inside the home. Is this fancy concept art or an abstract sequence actually in the movie? A gloomy night with some kind of risky character design. Being near a gas station, presumably near the car repair shop. Some 3D models realized, and hey, here's even more details on the actual humans of the story. I don't see much of those. There's a little outhouse, a school bus, a scrap heap by a tree that good old boy later turns into a vehicle. Cool. And then there's the actual animated stuff. Like this proof of concept showing most dolls reacting in a cinema screening of The Sixth Sense. It was relevant in 1999, with Granny telling quips and spoiling the movie, and the dog having an unexpectedly low voice for his teeny tiny size.
Pipe down, you old bag!
Gucci? You just made a date with Gucci!
What a line. What a line. And this final bit with Abraham Lincoln animated. Overall, it looks pretty interesting, but I could never piece all of these things together, really. As for the voice cast, tell me if you recognize some of these people. Dolly Parton as Angel. And then people more known for pre-2000 stuff, mostly before my time in all honesty. But they are Billy Connolly as Angel's dog, known as Fergus in Brave and Dane in the Hobbit series. Diedrich Bader as Herbert Hollingshead, who's Rex in Napoleon Dynamite and Trapjaw in the new He-Man. Hal Holbrook as Abe, who he's later involved with Lincoln in the 2012 film Lincoln. Lily Tomlin as Miss Spinster, who's now Aunt May in the Spider-Verse, though I recognize her as Mrs. Berenger in Pink Panther 2.
Inspector, we never refer to Japanese people as our little yellow friends.
But why?
This all went over my head as a kid. My god. Anyway, next there's Lou Rolls as Bluesman, known for his soundtrack work on stuff like Playback and The Tuxedo. Ashley Judd as Rose McGee, being in Double Jeopardy at the time and Twin Peaks in 2017. Travis Tritt as Elgin Harper, being in Blues Brothers 2000 with Lou Rolls. And more soundtracking for My Cousin Vinny and Honeymoon in Vegas. Mike Snyder, with an I, as Good Old Boy, performing in The Dolly Show and as an announcer in Nashville Beat. And finally, there's Charles Durning as Old Man McGee, being in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, as well as the Muppet movie in 1979. A lot of this, admittedly, goes over my head, but it's a whole different time with a whole different people, and some of these guys were big, winning awards and everything. Not to mention, for a short time, Barry Cook had convinced James Carville to voice Crazy Ray. Who's James Carville? I didn't know. He was the former lead strategist for Bill Clinton's presidential campaigns. Nowadays commenting on liberal politics still, but notably giving a prediction in the 2020 election that was, quote, the most audacious, confident, and spectacularly incorrect prognostication about the year for thinking the presidency would be known by 10 p.m. rather than 4 days later. I'm sorry I keep falling down rabbit holes here, but it's fascinating as a British guy who doesn't know 1990s America. Still, what a crazy casting. Imagine if politicians getting into movies was a trend. There were also big hits in the soundtrack with bluegrass musician Ricky Staggs hired to work with Marty Stewart and Hank Williams III, each known for The Raw Deal and The Cat in the Hat, The Marty Stewart Show, and Fun with Dick and Jane, Driven, and The Judge, respectively, so a lot of the budget went there too. But of course, things started to go downhill fast. One of the things to note actually comes from that prologue song again, which seems to be a slightly later draft of events as it describes the film as taking place in
Long ago, about 1811.
which is certainly not the 1940s vibe from before. Abraham Lincoln was just about born then, huh? But rewrites would become commonplace after one major change. In January of 2003, Thomas Schumacher resigned as head of animation and was replaced by former television animation head David Stainton. And this guy was not on board with My Peoples. Immediately, Staten began to suggest several name changes for the film, hence why there's a lot of titles. Like Once in a Blue Moon, or Elgin's People, or a favourite, Angel and Her No Good Sister, which implies conflict immediately, apparently. Staten found himself unimpressed with the film's story reel presented to him in February 2003, so it was rewritten again. After taking a research trip to the Appalachian Mountains, Cook then suggested that the dolls be not spelled to life, but possessed by Elgin's deceased relatives. Cheery. But it makes sense, as a lot of ghost stories were present in that city. Though something that was clarified for, say, the Abraham Lincoln character was he wasn't literally the president. He's an old scrub brush with spoons for ears that thinks he's president. Like Teddy in Arsenic and Old Lace, who thinks he's Roosevelt. So they, quote, "We're gonna have him do crazy President Lincoln kind of things, like emancipating the chickens out in the barnyard." But that said, Abe's character was also going to be this movie's voice of reason. He would be the one advising caution when all of the characters wanted to go rushing after Angel. What that means for his traits if possessed by a dead human that's probably not the president, I have no idea, but you can see how it gets complicated on the logic. Due to this alteration now, the title was changed from My Peoples to A Few Good Ghosts. Sounds less appealing to me. While Staten was happy with this change, Barry Cook, having now a personal attachment to his original storyline, wished he could stick with it. However, as director, you know you gotta make sacrifices for the big bad Hollywood process. And the grueling process continued from there. With new executives in charge, it was a much harder pitch to convince people to get into it. And supposedly, exec story notes would turn more and more erratic as time went on, starting with something like, "Stage that scene indoors at an old-time movie theater," to, maybe the scene would play better if it was set outdoors at a drive-in movie. Either way, it had many rewrites. And then it was announced on March 25th, 2002, the Burbank studio of Walt Disney Feature Animation would soon be transformed into an all-digital operation, producing only CG movies, with the last two hand-drawn projects, Brother Bear and the 30% of My Peoples, being completed in Florida. And though David Stainton allowed Barry's film to officially go into production in May of 2003, the project was only up and running for a brief 6 months. Later in November of 2003, David Staten flew to the studio's Florida animation branch where Barry Cook worked and announced that the film would be shut down due to Chicken Little just having more potential. He also announced that the branch would be closing down the following year, decimating everyone's jobs. So in November of 2003, it was cancelled. Why? The guys at the top just weren't getting it. Not to mention, Chicken Little was deemed more favorable. Look how that turned out. Though apparently that too had been warped to hell and back. Another factor came from the fact that executives seriously underestimated the appeal of bluegrass musicians. Though Cook had argued that they just distributed Oh Brother Where Art Thou domestically in 2000 with a load of bluegrass music and went on to win a Grammy as Album of the Year and become one of the best-selling soundtracks of all time. But apparently by 2003 it was forgotten. And soon enough, Cook discovered that there just wasn't room for him either at the new version of the company. And after 22 years, he moved on, saying, "It's a hard lesson to learn that, while you may be personally loyal to a corporation, it's impossible for a corporation to be loyal back to an individual. Enormous multinational companies just aren't built like that." Yeah. And so Cook went on to tell each voice actor. Charles Durning was especially upset after apparently being incredibly hyped to do voice work for an animated character in a Disney film, and that was the end of My Peoples 18 years ago. So, where are they now? Well, for most of 2009, Cook was over in the UK, where he worked at Aardman Animations. And in 2011, he became co-director of another iconic movie, Arthur Christmas. So I wouldn't say it was a totally bad ending. Looking back on My Peoples, Cook said, "More than any other project, I poured my soul into it. I opened myself up to all the things I love, the culture I grew up in, the music that I still to this day love dearly. It was all part of that. It was very personal to me as a filmmaker," as is a running theme with these cancelled productions. It seems a little ahead of its time with its style and a new corner of representation for a culture less common on the big screen. But it likely won't be coming back. Just a shame that Chicken Little had to be the thing that replaced it.
How'd you get over there?
Over where?
There.
Where?
There. How'd you get over there? Who are we talking about?
For now though, that's all from me. My name's been Daz. You didn't really care. Next time we've got a terrible Netflix adaptation that'll soak up way too much of my time. Come see if I'm live right now, and I'll see you in a bit.